had a big barn, tin barn. It was new. It was one of the few new buildings that was on that farm.
Did you have electricity on the farm initially?
Well, we did, thanks to Dad. He had what they call carbide system. Put a tank of carbide down into the ground and then hook it onto the lights that looked like we had electric lights or something. But they were just the regular lights. But you know what? It was amazing how well we could see in the house with those lights. And my parents, they're a big family too. I think there were 11 in the family altogether. My mother came from Lanham, Kansas. My dad came from Alta, Iowa. And they met in Ludell, Kansas. And he married the sweetest wife of anybody he could ever have married. Taking care of their animals on their farm, and the pigs and all of this, you know, and the cattle. I milk cows every morning and every night. And, you know, in the morning you'd have to get up and break the ice on the tanks and when it was cold. I just had one brother, and he was usually helping my dad out on the farm and working his machinery or just the horses. And so that's how they got started, just doing whatever they had to work with. My dad said, "You are the firstborn. You are the secondborn." They were marking us. And my Aunt Emma, that was my dad's sister, she was there with them when they had us at home. And they said, "Oh, this is something now, just to have a twins born right here. This is it." And so that's how it all happened.
And what kind of health was your father in?
He was in good health when they were married and so forth, but as he got older, then he had more problems with his health. But
what kind of problems?
Oh, his heart. You know, sometimes it just wasn't functioning properly. And he finally ended up in the hospital, and he ended up dying. But little town of McCook, Nebraska. Oh, we had a good relationship. But Dad was also it was very important to him that we knew what we were to be studying and doing, and he was watching with one eye all the time when he was reading the paper. So, I mean, he really did oversee us, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And my mother, in the same time, she would be making bread, you know, fixing her bread and fixing she used to have a starter, and she'd keep it in the basement part where it's cool, and then she'd get that starter up and start that up, and then we'd have really good bread. But she was really good at making bread. But she was a good mom.
So did she make all of your clothes?
Yes. If she made one dress for me or my twin sister, then before she did anything else, she'd make the other dress. Because she knew just how, she'd have the Sears Roebuck catalog or with her and opening it. "Oh, that's cute the way that's made. I think I'll do it that way." And you know, she would figure it out, and we always had beautiful dresses. They were Lutheran, and they were very involved in their church. It so happened they both went to the Lutheran church, and so they always enjoyed going to the church and doing all the different things that we did those days. We would go to Grandma's, and that was always very, very special to go to Grandma's. And we'd pick these cherries and can them and all that kind of stuff. But we did a lot of things with Grandma. My grandpa was too rigid, but he was too busy to do much else because he was so involved in what was going on in Germany, in the country where he grew up.
I see.
So that was very special for him to know what was going on in Germany. On Sunday, we'd invite relatives over, and we'd sit around the table, and we had our family get-togethers. We had a lot of people at the table.
And then it was majorly foods from the farm?
Mm-hmm. Always had a cow to butcher, you know, or whatever.
After you got married, where did you live?
Oh, we lived in a little house in the little town of Ludell, Ludell, Ludell. And it was not far from his mom and dad. The oldest one is Keith, and he's in St. Louis, and he's a pastor. Jane and Toby, yeah, they were very involved here. So they still do. They still come here regularly,
Come here.
right here. They just, how are you doing? Because, they're always just checking on us, which is wonderful. And then the next one was Ruth. And then the next one was Dwight, and he's a caretaker too. He's really good about what do we need and what don't we need and so forth. And he's got a tremendous sense of humor. And Craig, our son Craig, loves to fish. You know what? Art turned 85 last August. He just found out that he isn't supposed to drive anymore. Just got that word about a couple months ago. So he's now without a car. And I don't drive. So now we have kids here that are glad to take us. So we're just thankful for that. I went to the college and I took a class under a teacher, and he was somebody that was at St. Francis, Kansas. That's where he used to be. But he just took me by the hand and we just learned to drive that car in no time. But it sure took a lot for me to learn to drive that car. We had an old piano that worked great, and we just enjoyed it a lot. And then later on, we got a little baby grand piano. Worked great, and I think he has it now.
Yeah.
Because now our youngest son, Craig, loves that piano. Brian, he's learned to play the organ now. And so he's getting into it more and more all the time, too. So they like their piano. Some things do pass on.
How did you get your pets?
Well, one day I just get a telephone call from Ruth. Mom, I've decided I'm going to come see you next week. And I'm bringing my dog this time. And I said, you are? So how's that going to go? Oh, that'll go just fine. That dog will like it. That dog will like it at your house. The thing is, we raised 5 kids and no pets anymore here. And now we're going to have a pet? I can't imagine. And she says, oh, you will be able to imagine when you see it. Well, it ended up, I thought, oh, that dog is really nice. I would like to have a dog like that, And it wasn't a few days that she came and she left and she said, now, don't you think you'd like a dog like that? And I said, I think I'd love it. And we all went out to Oregon for this last summer. And we took all of our families along, and we told them the year before, now this year, you're all in college now, and it's time you start coming for some special times together, or we're going to lose it. And so, you know what? They all came. Every one of them came. We did fun things on the stream. Well, some of them hadn't done it before, but they all come back now. We're going kayaking, or this or that, whatever. But they really did love that time together. It made me very happy.
My one grandfather was dead. My grandmother on my dad's side, she lived with us then. My dad was the youngest in his family, and he was the last one to get married, and they were on the home place there, so she stayed there. She spent most of her time in her room, though, rather than being amongst the family quite a bit. I was 10 years old when she died, so I was under that much. And my other grandfather on my mother's side, he died in 1923, so I never did know him, but my grandmother lived till 1945. Hofbauer was my mother, and then her mother was an Unger, so the Unger family was quite large.
What kind of personality did your mom have?
Well, she was quite easygoing too, and she didn't. She wasn't real forceful as far as getting out in the community, but she got along real well, and I thought she did real well with all of us around there.
Now, where was your father born?
He was born in eastern Kansas, about around Bremen. He was a hard worker, I know. Had to do that to raise a family. And, well, when there was extra work around, like when they were building roads or something, he usually tried to get a job with that. He had quite a few horses, and they used a lot of horses for moving dirt back in those days. The home place was a little over 700 acres, but then my dad rented like 700-800 acres to farm besides that. There was a parochial school near where my dad lived, and my mom went there for a couple of years. I think that's where they met then. About the time they got married, there was a church built in the nearest town of Ludell. That was less than a mile from home. The church that was built first when the Lutherans settled out there was about 4.5 miles from our place, which in those days was a fair distance, you know. Had to go in a buggy or something. I have 6 brothers and 4 sisters, and 3 brothers are older and 3 younger, and 2 sisters are older and 2 are younger. So, yeah, I worked horses for several years. Dad got a tractor right around the 29 or 30, along in there, but still had to use horses for a lot of things. Well, the dust storms started about 1934, if I remember right, with a black afternoon. It just turned dark as night about 5 o'clock afternoon. That's when Oklahoma was blowing up, I guess.
Blowing into Kansas.
Blowing into Kansas and covering it up. The years after that, almost every year there were bad dust storms. Sometimes you couldn't drive down the road. You'd have to wait till the storm was over. And dust piled up in the fence rows a couple of feet deep, like if it was snow, but it was dust. It was hard to get any cash, and livestock was cheap because there wasn't enough feed for them, you know, to raise a lot of them. Grass didn't grow very well, but farmers usually had a few cattle and little grain, but not enough to really keep their heads above water. So a lot of farms that insurance companies or other lenders took over during the 30s. We all ate around one table, and seemed like it got a little crowded for chairs around then. So there for several years, when I was, I guess 6, 7 years old or so, I stood beside one brother, and she always cooked a meal for every meal, morning, noon, and night. There was nothing, just have a sandwich or something. Always a hot meal. Yeah, and she baked a lot of bread and stuff. Well, he developed diabetes when he was, around 50 or maybe a little less, and that caused problems, and then 10, 12 years later he had a stroke. And so between the two, his health got quite bad.
So you went to college?
Yes, Kansas State College.
What were you studying?
I studied agricultural engineering, got my degree in that. So that kind of prepared me for soil conservation work. I did teach vocational ag at high school 1 year after I got out of college, but then at the end of the year they drafted me pretty quick. During the war, the Allies had taken Leyte already and had a base camp there, replacement depot they called it. Then I was landed there and then went to a small island, Morotai, in the Dutch East Indies for additional training and to join the 31st Division, who had been in Papua New Guinea and were moving up towards the Philippines. So they were on Morotai getting set to go up to the Philippines. So then, after I was overseas about 3 months, then we went into Mindanao and fought the Japanese there. Well, when I was in the infantry, which was while the war was on, I was a private first class yet, but then after the war, then I was assigned to a field hospital. I was carrying a rifle most of the time, but I was also an assistant to the BAR, they called it, Browning automatic rifle, which was really a heavy thing. It took 2 people to change off to carry those things. Going into the Philippines, when we landed there, we had to land, well, we were on a fairly large ship, so it was a big harbor. Then we got into a smaller boat and went on up a river for, I don't know, 12 hours or more. And then we got out on the land. And the very first night after we got out into the jungle, we were fired on. Dug foxholes, just real shallow and big, so you could lay down in them, you know. But that was, well, that night we didn't have time. We just lay down on the ground. Bullets were going over your head. Didn't sound very good, but then we traveled. We got onto a road and marched along the road for quite a ways, but there wasn't any firefighting then. But you never knew whether there was going to be somebody alongside the road or not. We kind of went single file down the road till we got up to one really wooded area and fought there for a day or so, and then the next day I got hit by a sniper or something. And I was hit in my hip, but the bullet ended up kind of in the middle of my back, which I didn't know until 15, 16 years ago. It's still in there, but doesn't bother any. Anyhow, that.
So you're carrying the World War II memento around with you?
Nobody can see it though, except if you take an X-ray. Yeah. Then after a little time in the hospital, then I had to find my way back to my unit, and just went from one outfit to another till I got one that was going up close to where they were. That was, I don't remember exactly how much later it was, but it was probably a month that it took me to get back to the unit. And when I got back there, there's a real surprise. My brother was in another outfit, and his outfit had come close to where I was. It was close enough so we could go walk to see each other. So we saw him a few times. The last patrol I was on, we ran into the Japanese again, and I got shot through my pants leg, but missed my leg. But,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We wore our pants kind of bloused out over our boot and were bloused out. So that was close enough. I was glad things ended when they did. We got married April 11th, 1947. That was, I started my job just about 10 days before that. We got married in the church and then had reception at Dorsey's folks' house. The one thing they used to do then is had what they call chivalries. People that weren't invited to the wedding but knew you quite well, they would get together, and the night of the wedding they would all drive up with their lights off, or something, and then all of a sudden make a whole lot of noise, pounding on brake drums and stuff, anything, kettles, to make a lot of noise, and then you'd go out and give them cigars or treats or something.
When you first got married, did you live in a house or apartments or what?
Yeah, it was a house. It was the neighboring house to where my folks lived, about a half mile away was all. And it was one that the people that used to live there had started to build. They built a basement, but we lived in the basement till just about the last month that we were there. Then we moved upstairs.
You remember your first car?
Yeah, the first one I bought was a 37 Plymouth. That was in 47 when I bought that, or fall of 46, I guess. Well, yeah, I drove Model A for years to high school.
Oh, yeah.
We lived far enough away that there were kids that needed rides. Parents didn't all drive to school, and they tried to pool the rides. We get 6 people in that thing, that 2-door. Well, when the first one was born, we were living in that first house. We had to drive about 7 miles to where the hospital was in the neighboring town. And something happened to my car. The fuse went out, the lights wouldn't work anyhow. But it just happened that the moon was bright enough we could drive. That was around midnight when we went there. And when we got there, we told the nurse what the deal was, and she called the doctor, and she told who was there, and the doctor said, "Well, it can't be. She was just in here this afternoon. I saw her this afternoon." But she was there, ready to have the baby, and he barely got there. Our oldest son was only 2 or 3 weeks old when we moved to Goodland, and then a couple years later, our next one was born in Weller, and next 3 were born at Goodland. And then 57, we moved from Goodland to Hayes, Kansas. And then our last one was born at Hayes in 58.
Why'd you move to Hayes?
Because of a job change. I was still with the Soil Conservation Service, but I was given a job as an area engineer at that time. At Goodland, I was what they called a work unit conservationist. And then the last year or two, they assigned me to engineering out there. And then an opening came at Hayes as area engineer, so I got that one. And that's where we lived till we moved here. In 1980, that's when Mount St. Helens erupted, and the Soil Conservation Service was involved in cleaning out some tributaries from the rivers. And they sent out inquiry whether anybody would be interested in going there to help out, so I sent my name in. And so I spent a couple of months there doing engineering on some tributaries, staking out for the drain, you know, how much cut they would have to make to, because so much stuff was just leveled off flat with all the sand that washed down from the mountain.
What did you find interesting about New Guinea?
Oh, the people, I guess, and the crops they grow, and people walked almost everywhere. So, I mean, they had a few buses, but not very many cars. And there weren't roads out to a lot of the villages either. When we were there, we'd drive part way sometimes to get to village, but then we'd usually have to walk quite a ways. Or sometimes we'd take a boat and go along the coast for a ways, then get out and then walk up into the hills. I went over there with the Lutheran volunteers. Lutheran World Missions is what it was. It was a volunteer program. They had some people who went over as missionaries, but they had some of us go over there to work on projects like their footbridges were made of vine and poles across the streams, you know. So we designed some that were made out of steel, the steel cable, and then they'd put the steel floor in. And I did some surveying for airstrips and water supplies. They had a pretty good supply of good water, but to get it close to the village was a problem. Sometimes they had to walk for an hour each way to get their water. So in some cases we could get to the source of it up in the mountains and get a pipeline figured out to lay down to the village. Well, we've had some real nice vacations. Probably the biggest one, well, it was the biggest one and probably one of the better ones, was we went over to Europe for 6 weeks. Went on the train and went to visit some relatives. We went to different parts of Germany. We went to Bremen, went to Passau, down the southeast. And one of the first things, we went to Holland. It was a tulip time when we got there, so they were having tulip festival. And went to the eastern end of Switzerland. Then went to Austria, visited relatives in Vienna, and then with some relatives over in Hungary. And that was just before the wall came down. That was in the spring and summer of '89. And when we got to Hungary, we had to give them our passports, and they kept it till we came out again. And so we visited some distant relatives there, and it was good to meet them. That's where my mother's ancestors came from. Then we ended up going to Denmark and up along the east side of Sweden, and we had met somebody from Finland. So we went up to visit that person. I retired in '82. Then we started going up to a retreat center up in about the center of Washington. And we spent as much as 5 or 6 months there each year for several years as volunteers for our board and room, you know. And Doris did housekeeping, was in charge of housekeepers, and I was in charge of lawns and landscaping, flowers and so on. So that was all new experiences.